What is trading defensively? Stick around. Hey traders, warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining me. All right, so let's have a look at what is trading defensively. What does it actually mean? So first of all, before we go into some details, this is my definition. There's no textbook definition per se, but when I want to kind of be a little bit more cautious about what I'm doing, these are some of the things I'll implement. We'll talk about those in a second. Now, we've got to be careful that we're not going into the extreme, which is trading not to lose versus trading defensively. There's two distinct differences, but the line's quite blurred. Now, trading not to lose is generally a losing proposition because you're changing the strategy you're trading, you're changing the way you approach the markets, and you're doing stuff like, having really tight stops, snatching at profits, which ultimately means that over time you're probably going to be losing money because you're fearful of loss. Now, trading defensively is still taking risk, but doing something slightly differently to perhaps the normal way of trading, and definitely differently from maybe a more aggressive way of trading. Now, these are the labels that are put on it. Doesn't necessarily mean this is right or wrong, but sometimes you kind of helps to frame things in this manner depending on the conditions, etc. So if we're talking about trading not to lose, we're avoiding that. If we want to trade ultimately defensively, guys, the best way of trading defensively is to not trade. That's the ultimate way of trading not to lose, is to just not risk money. You have to accept that if you're going into the arena, if you're stepping into the ring, then you are going to have to risk some money. There's no way that you can trade without some risk. And that's kind of, we fall into that category sometimes. So anyway, that's the point. Trading defensively. Let's look at some of the things that perhaps we would do to trade a bit more defensively. So the idea of trading defensively is that maybe we're in a situation where the environment isn't as good as it could be for our trading. Maybe that's because the volatility is too low. Maybe it's because the volatility is too high. Maybe it's because the market's chopping around. Maybe it's just trading in an odd way that really doesn't suit your style. Now, of course, we talked about you could step back completely, but maybe there's still opportunity, but you just want to be very careful about when you take your trade. Now, an aggressive trader might be hitting it regularly. A defensive trader will be very strict with the entries. In other words, you're saying, okay, this is the price I want. I want the perfect pullback. I want the perfect fake out and back. I want it exactly as I want it. But of course, you understand that that means that there's going to be many trades that almost set up but don't actually execute. And that's kind of maybe the difference between aggressive and defensive. Defensive, you're waiting for that perfect setup, but understanding and not letting this get into your head that actually the perfect setup for you might mean that you miss 5 or 6 before you get the right one. As long as you can deal with that from a kind of mindset perspective as well, it's saying, okay, the pullback that I really want to give me the best risk reward that would fit my criteria perfectly is here. I'm not going to get it any earlier. I'm going to be prepared to the fact it might not get there. You get the idea. And then it's having super tight filters. One of my processes is to make sure that I have filters and then a trigger. So I have filters where they really kind of filter out any of the trades that I'm not interested in, and then they go on and maybe get the trigger activated or not. So filters here would be something like, okay, well, I'm not going to trade unless I have a volatility above this level, or I'm not going to trade unless we see we're in an uptrend on the daily, or whatever the filter may be for you. But that might be tightening those right up. In other words, letting far less stuff through. So again, you're kind of doing the same thing, but on a higher level. You're saying I'm only trading the very best days or the very best stocks or the very best conditions that are really kind of gelling with the way that I trade. And then it's not things like operational things, like not adding to a trade. So playing defensively would be, you've got your trade on, and actually instead of kind of adding to the trade and pressing the trade, which we might do if we're trading aggressively into a market, we're playing defensively. We're probably taking stuff off. So as the kind of trade goes in our direction, we're peeling a bit back, we're putting a bit in the bank, we're peeling a bit back. So we're playing defensively, in other words, so that when or if the market were to rock back to our entry price, we've still put some in the bank. But of course, the downside, a flip side of doing that, of course, is that we're now not in a full position if it goes in our direction. We're now taking off side as it goes further and further in our favor. So that's a very defensive way of trading. But ultimately, again, going back to the initial point, why we do this? We do this because perhaps the market isn't conducive to the way we're trading. Perhaps the kind of frame around it isn't that great. And so we're happy to kind of take some stuff off as the market just gives us something. We're not looking for those big moves. We're not really looking for something that's really in line or clicking thinking with the way we trade. So scaling early, not adding to a trade, and it's protecting capital. So, whatever we're doing, we're taking fewer trades, which obviously comes in, with the filters and scaling and stuff, but we're on this kind of fine line again between trading not to lose and protecting capital, and saying, okay, we're risking less. Our size is being dialed down a little bit. We're scaling out positions. We're instead of pushing and risking more, because obviously if you're adding to positions or you're holding positions longer, you would have got more risk on the table. We're having that initial risk, but then when we start to see something where, let me just take some off here, let me put some in the bank, let me just make sure that flow of money is still occurring, just because the conditions aren't quite right. And avoiding things like high volatility probably comes in with stuff like tight filters here, but high volatility environment, and even a low volatility environment. I know from my perspective, a low volatility environment is far worse for me, and that's when I'm playing very defensively. I'll try to get those rotations, but I'm definitely not looking for, those big strong moves in directions, and we'll be scaling out and expecting it to pull back and rock back and just be noisy or just go quiet, those kind of things. So, it has to be in line with the way that you trade and your strategy and your setup, and what works well for you. So that's trading defensively, guys. Those are some of the things that I kind of do if I'm trading defensively. Again, being careful. I want to reiterate this, being careful that we're not stepping into the trading not to lose camp, because that's really a losing proposition, but kind of trading to make money still, but recognizing that we're just kind of knocking the singles, we're just kind of just keeping the flow going. And most importantly, and a lot of great traders, if you read their books and stuff, talk about this, is that very often people are just trading defensively with small size, scaling it out to keep a feel for the market, so that yes, they recognize that this isn't going to kind of make them massive amounts of money, but they're in tune, they're ready to strike. So when the real opportunities come and they get real juicy environment for the way they trade, they can push the throttle down and really start to trade much more aggressively, rather than having to go in fresh and not being in tune with the market. And this keeps them in tune with the market. So that's trading defensively, guys. See you next one. Take care. Keep your risk manager wherever you're doing. Bye bye.